Serious, what is the scariest thing that you have ever encountered while home alone? I was house sitting for some family. They neglected to mention that their cat knows how to open doors. I learned this at 2 AM when the bedroom door flung open. Was in the shower when I heard the door to my apartment being unlocked. Husband wasn't due back for several hours. Turns out it was the skeevy-ass building manager snooping around people's apartments when he thought they were not home. Reported him to the company that owned the building, but nothing ever came of it. Moved out shortly after. I was taking a nap in my apartment under blankets in my bed when I hear the door open. Thinking it's my husband, I ignore it. But about 5 minutes later, I hear several female voices. I'm thinking I'm dreaming, so again, I ignore it. The voices get louder and suddenly my bedroom door opens. I freak out and bolt upright in bed. 3 women were in my apartment, 2 young, 1 older. I shriek. They shriek. They run out of my apartment. It turned out that the management company showed the wrong apartment available for rent that day. I got an apology and a bouquet of flowers. We lived in a maisonette in London. We lived upstairs and a man was downstairs. He came banging at our door one day screaming that his flat was being flooded from our bathroom and to let him in. Well, I was 14 and my bro 13, mum was out. He came in, went into the bathroom and did something. I don't know what. He was an adult and we trusted him. Well, mum called the council out and there had never been a leak. No watermarks or anything, so mum told us not to let him in again. Next time mum went out, he came banging at the door again and we told him what mum said. He went apeshit. Let me fucking in, let me fucking in. All the while banging the fuck out of the door. God knows why he wanted in. Scary. I was woken from a deep sleep by the most horrifying high-pitched howling noise. We lived deep in a wooded area, and I was familiar with sounds like foxes barking or even fisher cats screaming, but this was eerie and didn't sound like an animal. Then it came from the other side of the house, but there was no sound of anything walking. You know how your mind isn't really logical when you first wake? I was convinced it was some terrible otherworldly creature. In the morning I checked some online recordings of sounds to figure it out. Turned out to be a tiny harmless screech owl. Little guy can make some demonic sounds too. I was maybe 11 or 12 and was home alone one winter day. The desktop computer I was using shared a wall with our unheated garage. The house was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. All of a sudden this boom erupted from the garage that shook the wall. It honestly sounded like a bomb went off. 20 minutes later, after hiding behind the couch and getting my heart rate down, I finally went to inspect. A 2-liter Sprite bottle had frozen and exploded off the shelf. Growing up we had a large old mirror with a thick wood frame leaning against the wall in our hallway. I was doing some homework in the kitchen but got up to get something from the living room. The hallway is the connecting room between the two. So I passed through it, picked up whatever I needed in the living room, turned around and was on my way back. And that old mirror is broken on the floor. It's shattered. Pieces everywhere. As if it had exploded. It was completely fine when I passed it just seconds before. I didn't hear it break. I just kind of walked by it and headed out the kitchen door. Scared the shit out of me. The first night alone at my new house, a dude tried scouting around my home looking for a way in. I flipped on all the lights and ran downstairs as loudly as I could, holding a plastic tomahawk in one hand, and my phone dialing 911 in the other. He never actually got inside the house, but it was terrifying, especially since it was literally my first night of living on my own. My husband was having a dude's weekend and I was home alone with our kid. The downstairs neighbors were fighting, nothing new there, when all of a sudden I heard her scream, "Help me, please God, someone help me." So loud I knew she had run out the kitchen into the back stairwell. She was crying and screaming, their baby was screaming, then there were thumps and more yelling. I had already called 911 and while they were getting my information everything went silent down there. The baby suddenly stopped, everything was quiet. I told them to hurry. The police arrived and I had to let them in the building, so much for an anonymous report, and they pounded on the downstairs door for a while with no answer. They tried calling the landlord to get permission to break down the door, but one officer came up to ask me if there was another way in. I showed them the back stairwell and said they were unlikely to have bothered locking the kitchen door. They hadn't, and the officers got in. Nobody home. They came back and asked me again what I'd heard, and another officer hung back. The family was finally found in the basement. He said they'd all been down there doing laundry and hadn't heard the police knocking. Bullshit, people down the block could hear them threatening to break down the door. We'd drawn quite a crowd. She insisted everything was fine and she and the baby were safe and sent the police on their way. Nothing they can do if she insists she's safe. I couldn't sleep all night, and they were extra cold to us after that. A few months later I answered the door to two police officers responding to a report of DV. The downstairs neighbors claimed they'd heard screaming and thumps and then saw my husband jump in his car and speed away. I was home alone, still in my nightgown. They could see lots of skin and no visible marks, and my husband had been out of the country on business for 3 days. They got in trouble for the false report and moved out later that month. I hope she eventually left him. I was probably about 12, newly allowed to be home alone for a couple hours over the summer. A man was walking through my fenced-in backyard, walked right onto my deck to the back window. My dog was going nuts, barking with her hair standing up. I had no way out of the house or to the phone without this man seeing me in the window. So I'm hiding behind the couch waiting for him to break in when I see him exit my yard through the gate. I immediately call my mom almost in tears and she said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you the gas meter guy was coming." Of course the gas meter is right next to the window my brother and I always used to break into our own house when we forgot our keys. My dog was the only badass that day. I was babysitting a family I was unfamiliar with. My parents knew them and suggested me when they needed a babysitter, and as I liked having money, I accepted. The kids go to bed and I kill time as one does before smartphones are a thing by reading, I think. Maybe doing homework, but that seems unlikely. Anyways, I start to hear speaking from another room. Not just speaking, but this low, almost demonic voice speaking to another one. I'm not a religious sort, but when you realize that no, you're not just hearing things, there's definitely a voice, it's more than a little creepy. Not knowing what was going on, I slowly crept up to the doorway of the sitting room, then peered around the corner. Fucking Furbies. Talking to each other. At night. In the dark. Furbies suck. I was at a friend's house, watching her cats, and suddenly someone stood on the balcony, right when I walked down the hallway. I stopped dead and stood frozen for minutes, heartbeat up in my throat. Turns out it was my reflection. Took me solid 10 minutes. Edit, thanks for the award and great answers, smile. A tree branch crashed through my window when I was home alone playing Xbox. I've always thought I would be prepared for like an intruder or something, but if that was a dude that just did that SWAT rope swing thing through my window, he would have had enough time to walk over to me, grab a gun from my hand, load it, and shoot me before I figured what the fuck went on. I was like one of those goats that faint when you scream at them. I was babysitting my little sister. We were both watching television. All of a sudden I hear gunshots and bullets ricocheting from the window security bars. A moment later I hear moaning and screams coming from my front door. It was a drive-by shooting. 3 teenagers were shot up and managed to crawl to my door seeking help. As a 14-year-old at the time, it was something I was definitely not prepared to handle. A big, freshly shed rattlesnake skin on the floor in front of the TV where my kids were watching cartoons. I was home alone since my husband was away on deployment. One night as I was falling asleep, both my dog and I heard someone on the porch walking around. My dog flipped out and I decided to go downstairs. I grabbed my gun out of the safe and headed downstairs. About 2/3 of the way down I saw the man through the front door windows. We locked eyes and he said, "Let me in." I told him that he needed to leave. Again, "Let me in." I told him he needed to leave and that I was calling the cops. Let me in. I told him I that had a gun. So do I, and he lifted up a gun and aimed it at me. I fired my gun through the window but missed him. He ran off. The cops found him a few blocks from my house a little bit later. His gun ended up not being loaded. Still, most terrifying shit ever. Screams of fucking foxes, as in mating. No joke, almost shat my pants the first time. I had a massive tub of Lego fell over while I was eating downstairs. I kid you not, it sounded like somebody went through the window. I was frozen on the spot thinking I was going to be killed or kidnapped or something. An hour and a bit passed and I thought they must have left. I slowly went around the house looking for evidence of the break-in. Then I saw the Lego all over the floor. I was 11 and home alone. I got out of the shower to discover my house had been broken into. Teen from down the street and his sister were in the living room ransacking the place. My dad kept one of those glass door gun cabinets at the end of the hall by the bedroom door. I took out the first gun I could grab and yelled at them. Dude turned around with a knife but dropped and ran when he saw the rifle. Coward shoved his sister down as he bolted back out the door. The girl stayed on the ground, screaming as I called the cops. They both got arrested over a pocket full of change the guy had shoved in his hoodie. This was in the 90s in Texas and my mom was more pissed about the broken door and them touching her change jar than anything. When I was like 7 or 8, I was taking a bath when I saw a guy walk out from the basement onto the back porch, and out the backyard. Turns out we were being robbed when we got home. The guy hid in the basement for like an hour or two until he made his escape. He had stolen a bunch of hunting knives and stuff like that. Just moved into our brand new home, my husband goes out to pick up dinner. I'm just setting up our TV and all of a sudden a man comes down the flipping stairs. I scream at the top of my lungs and run for the front door. He screams at the same time. Thankfully the neighbors next door were outside. I squeak out that there is a strange man in my house. He comes out of my house and turns out he works for the development, and had been fixing an upstairs bathroom. My husband forgot to tell me he was there, woman face palming. I was watching TV alone like I do almost all the time and a cat jumped up on my lap. I ain't got no fucking cat, okay? My husband was out of town so I had gone over to a friend's house for dinner. Got home a little after 10 p.m., pulled into the garage and stepped out to grab my purse. I turned to head into the house and standing halfway down my driveway was a strange man I had never seen before. This was in a very rural wooded area with very little crime, but I still knew all my surrounding neighbors and this guy wasn't one of them. He just stood there staring at me and didn't say anything, so I stood there, frozen, staring back at him. Then he slowly began to walk towards me, and since I still had my car door open, all I could think to do was to reach in quick and shut the garage door. The door started to close and he turned away to start walking away. Unfortunately, in my panic I hit the button too many times and the door stopped and started to reopen. He was still about halfway down the driveway when this happened, with his back to me, and then quickly turned and started running full force right at me when it started to reopen. I hit the button 2 more times and the door went back to closing. Halfway closed and I saw his feet stop short right outside the door and stay there while it closed the rest of the way. All he had to have done was stick a foot forward and the door would have reopened again, but he didn't. Took me a few moments to work up the nerve to even go near the shut door where he had been to go into the house, because I wasn't sure if I was safer inside or in my car where I could drive off if needed. I decided to go inside to try and see if I could see him, and from my bedroom window I saw him standing out in the street staring at my house. I left all the lights off and called the police, who said they were sending someone out and to stay put behind a locked door if possible. I was making my way to my husband's office that had a closet that locked and saw our motion lights in the backyard turn on. I risked a peek out the windows and he was standing at our back sliding door trying to pull it open. I rushed to the closet, locking as many doors in between as I could, and waited there until the dispatcher on the phone said the police were out front. They didn't see anyone when they arrived but stuck around while I packed up some stuff to go stay at my sister's until my husband got home and said they would check on the house routinely for the next week. They never caught him and I didn't see him directly again, but weird things like someone lit a fire on our front doorstep in the middle of the night, and another night while watching TV I caught someone staring at me through the window, but it was only ever when my husband was out of town for work. Finally we adopted a huge dog and that seemed to put an end to it. But I still check my rearview mirror and close the garage door before I get out of my car. Our garter snakes had gotten out of their cage. We searched everywhere but couldn't find them. Finally my husband went to bed and I stayed up watching TV for a while. We had one of those gigantic old console TVs we had gotten when someone was throwing it out. Suddenly one of the dust-covered wires came slithering out from behind the TV. I had read Stephen King's Dolores Claiborne not too long before, and in that book the crazy old lady thinks the wires in her house are coming alive. I had a moment of holy crap, it's actually happening. Before I realized it was one of the snakes. That got my blood pumping, you better believe. I was super high cleaning the apartment one day, probably around 1 p.m. So the music was up, I was in my zone. Then someone started slamming on the door. It kept going. I stopped the music, thinking that maybe it was just a neighbor who wanted the music turned down. I didn't feel like answering the door because 1, I smoked a fuck ton of weed so was in no place to 2, COVID stopped the music, went quiet. But the aggressive knocking did not stop. So I looked through the peephole, smaller girl a bit bigger than my stature. Never seen her before, and I live in a complex with 6 units. So I know what my neighbors look like. But she keeps knocking. Being stupid, I opened the door. She just stared, asked where John was. I told her I don't know, there's no John here. She just stood and stared at me, definitely on something. I tell her to try down the hall, since I think there might be one that lives down there. I slowly go to close the door and she legit shoves her foot in the crack and starts to shove. So I start to struggle back, we are both actually wrestling with this door. I just go, what? Can I help you? I'm trying to close the door. She stops and relents a bit and does some weird eye shit and goes, oh. Okay, then walks off. Locked and bolted that fucker real quick. But yeah, don't open doors to strangers. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Or, you know, surrounded by forest. The sort of place where you wouldn't get a car unknown to you mistakenly driving into your driveway, your closest neighbors being across the field from your house, that sort of thing. Our house had 3 floors, of which the first one's backside was underground, built on a hill, so there was a staircase around the house with a door leading outside just behind my 2nd floor bedroom window, which was at the back of the house facing the forest. Nobody rarely used the door to enter the house as you had to walk up the stairs and behind the house in order to do so. I loved staying up late on my computer and would spend countless nights playing games and chatting with mates until the early hours. I must have been around 12. It was in the middle of summer, so it was incredibly light outside regardless of the time. My parents were on holiday and 2 of my brothers were not at home. I was about to go to sleep but did a little round around the massive house and noticed one of my brother's door was wide open. Only then I realized I was home all by myself and of course took advantage of that rare occasion and browsed through his room. Mostly it was just super cool entering his room, as he'd often tell me to get lost. Anyway, I got tired and finally went to bed. I soon woke up to what I thought was a loud, slow, banging noise. Startled, I sat up in my bed and looked around. It was still in the middle of the night. I felt my entire body tense as I sat as still as possible, listening. Perhaps I just dreamt it all up. Then I heard it again. Right outside my window. Only it was getting louder, and faster. I started panicking, remembering that I was all alone at home. Now I clearly heard someone moving outside. I gathered all of my courage and sneaked to the window, slowly getting closer to peek through the shutters. My hands were sweating and all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat growing faster in my ears. As I carefully moved the shutters aside, I saw a tall, skinny and fully naked man stood there. Outside my window. In the forest, behind our house, in the middle of fucking nowhere. I honestly don't even remember my exact reaction except for almost shitting myself, but only seconds later I heard the dude shouting. Insert my name here, open the fucking door right now, FFS. Open the fucking door. Are you deaf? Let me in right now. I recognized that voice. It was my brother. I quickly ran to the door and peeked through the window to make sure it indeed was him, before opening it. My brother had apparently managed to sleepwalk and lock himself outside butt naked, only to wake up somewhere in our garden. I guess he must have felt equally terrified when waking up that night, before realizing where he was or what was happening. It was pretty fucking hilarious the next day. For me at least. In the house alone one night and from my room I hear deep, guttural voices. Go in to check and no one is there. This happens a few more times that evening. After checking and finding nothing. Again I stand perplexed and then I hear the voices again, from my stereo speakers. Turns out it was a nearby ham operator coming across, somewhat, on my stereo speakers. Late at night I had both my cat and my girlfriend's dog start freaking out. I got up, grabbed my gun and flashlight and went through the house. Both the animals were growling and hissing at one of the vents, so I went over and shined my light into it and saw a cat. Turns out the previous tenants left their cats and there was a way for animals to get into the ventilation. Fun stuff. This year my pipes had frozen in my mobile home. My partner had gone to work, so I was home alone dealing with this issue. In order to get them back running you have to go under the trailer and turn on a heater to heat it up so it can run. The only access to get under the trailer is by getting under the deck. I dug out a large hole in the snow under the deck and had just enough room to squeeze under. As I started to shimmy towards the door to get under, the ice build-up became more dense and soon enough the deck and the ground had me stuck. I am not even claustrophobic and I was having a huge panic attack. I reached for my phone but realized I had left it back in the house. The only thing I did have with me was a pry bar to get the door open, so I managed to grab it and start to chip the ice away under me. Eventually after 10 minutes I was freed and got the hell out of there. The kicker to the story, my pipes were not even frozen, a city water main had broke, so none of this was necessary. Had whooping cough and after a coughing fit I was not able to breathe in again. Luckily I tried to force one more cough out of my empty lungs. It worked. Best breath I took in my life. 10/10 wood breath again. Someone trying to break open the window, woke up because my dog was barking, looked at the window and seen someone's head staring at me. He ran away and left a couple of tools. Got to experience heartburn for the first time while I was home alone. 100% thought I was going to die. So one summer after all my roommates went back home, I was living alone in a college apartment complex. One night I decided to go to the bars and then Uber home, relatively safe college town. I had done this plenty of times before and the city is pretty empty in the summer. I stepped out of the Uber and started walking up the stairs to my apartment when two men came down at the same time. My guess is they saw me exit the ride. They approached me and started complimenting me, asking for my number and where I was going. I brushed it off but really had nowhere else to go other than in my apartment since my car keys were in there, so when I reached the door I was like, oh, my boyfriend lives here, he's inside waiting for me, and one of them said, no, you don't have a boyfriend. We've seen you alone, which was a major red flag. Like major, but I had no other choice but to just run inside. Now I know I probably should have called the cops here, but they left me alone, so I left it alone. Well, the next night I was laying on my couch, directly in front of the front door, watching TV when I start to hear the door handle rattle. I freak out and go still and silent. Then I start to hear it get a little more forceful and it sounds like someone is pushing on the door. I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, went towards the door to look through the peephole at a distance, and it was the two guys from last night. Now I'm a pretty petite female, so I knew that I was no match. The two of them started knocking really loud, yelling that I needed to open the door. I ran to the end of the hallway and called 911. They started kicking the door, and at this point I was full on shaking, just full of adrenaline, but the operator was keeping me sane. At one point the knocking and bangs stopped for about 5 minutes and I was finally able to relax, and the operator let me know the cops were at the apartment looking for the guys. About 15 minutes later there was another knock at the door and it was the cops. They let me know that they searched the whole complex before coming over but couldn't find the two guys, but had seen similar reports of harassment and break-ins in the area from other females, and lectured me about how I should have reported it sooner. Needless to say, I went home for the rest of the summer and didn't come back until it was time to move out. I am an ex-Mormon. I was in my 20s and living at home. My parents were out of town and I had the whole house dark. I hear the doorbell ring and see a guy a little younger than me that I barely knew from my old ward standing behind a complete stranger I had never met. The stranger introduced himself as a new leader in the ward and said he wanted to come in and talk about the church. I declined, said goodbye, and started to close the door. As I was closing the door, he put his foot in the way and tried to force his way into the house while trying to tell me they were friends and that they just wanted to talk. I had to get more forceful with him to finally get him to leave. It was completely inappropriate for him to even be there, and even worse that he was trying to force his way into the house. I woke up one morning to a guy staring into my window right at me. I jumped up, of course, ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and went to confront the guy. I found out that there was going to be a house remodeled across the street and he had came to the wrong house. He apologized profusely and a co-worker of his yelled out, "Hey, over here you idiot." So that turned from terror into comedy. I also have sensor lights in my hallway. I was sitting one time, felt a really cold sensation, so I turned around. The sensor lights were turning on one by one as if somebody was walking towards me. It was scary, but I don't really believe in ghosts and I didn't see anybody coming, so I just brushed it off as a malfunction. When I was 12, a drunk neighbor tried winning back the affections of his ex by beating on her window with a plastic chair, shouting, "Come out here, you stupid bitch," at around midnight. Then threatened to harm anyone who tried to stop him. First time living alone. Took my dog in the backyard early morning, still completely dark out, before work. Heard a blood-curdling scream from next door and looked over to see the figure of someone jumping out the first floor window and proceed to start hopping the fence into my yard. Burglar was coming right at me. Luckily my dog was skittish as hell and was already on her way back to me cause of the scream. Slammed the door and locked it and proceeded to call 911. Somehow I called 911 before the guy who was burglarized because he was in shock. Spider running out of shorts. I just took off to get a shower while no one at home. I moved into a house at the beginning of last year and decided I wanted to get a security system. I got one that included cameras, door and window sensors, motion detectors, etc. Installing everything myself was pretty easy and straightforward. For the first week or so, if the alarm is tripped, no police are called and there's no response whatsoever, so you can get used to it. On my third night in the house at about 2:30 to 3 a.m., the alarm starts blaring and I remember jumping out of the bed in a panic. I couldn't believe my luck that I was really getting robbed and a lot of stuff was still in moving boxes for the guy. I turn off the alarm, grab my gun and clear the whole house. There wasn't a sign of entry anywhere to be seen. Turns out that one of the sensors I put up wasn't secured properly, so it fell off the door and assumed that the door was opened in the night. Felt real stupid after that. One day my mom left the house and the TV was not working, so I went upstairs to play with my Legos and a car ran into the backyard fence and a wooden pole flew into the window that was right next to the couch we used to watch TV, and all the glass fell onto the couch and floor. My house is on a high street, which in the UK is the main and busiest road through most towns, so it's not unusual to have a lot of people passing and activity going on. Earlier that day, I had answered the front door for a delivery, unlocking it to do so, then got on with whatever I was doing after that. Much later in the day, as it was getting dark, I was upstairs in my bed watching Netflix when I heard the front door open. I assumed it was my mum coming home from work because it was around the right time. Spoiler alert. Wasn't mum. So the first thing that tipped me off to something being strange was the fact I couldn't hear her keys. She has a ridiculous amount of keys that you can hear a mile off, and she's always struggling with them. Then I didn't hear her opening the door to the living room as she would usually do, and greet the dogs. I also have to add, at this point I had 3 dogs and not one of them made a noise, the little shits. Some guard dogs they are. Then the third thing that made me just freeze was the sound of footsteps very slowly and carefully coming up the stairs, heavy sounding footsteps. Footsteps that very obviously didn't belong to my relatively small mum. So I'm lying in my bed learning the meaning of being paralyzed with fear when a big man's head appears round my door. And I can only assume he was as shocked to see me as I was to see him, because the next thing I heard was "sorry, wrong house" before he hauled himself down the stairs a damn sight quicker than he came in. The minute I heard the door shut, I was down those stairs locking the door quicker than I've ever done anything in my entire life, and safe to say I make absolutely sure that door stays locked now. I was in my apartment, which was on the top floor of a 4-story building which had a slanted roof with Mexican tile shingles. I heard what sounded like a possum or a coon jumping on the roof. All of a sudden I hear a loud boom and feel the apartment shake. All of a sudden there was a man on my balcony. This balcony had an 1.5-foot overhang from the roof and no discernible way to get from the roof to the balcony. He was screaming that people were shooting at him. I had not heard any gunfire. I yelled through the glass to get down behind the wall as I was calling the cops for him. Not 10 seconds passed when I heard the glass sliding doors crash as he threw a potted plant into my living room. I happened to be in the kitchen and grabbed a knife while I yelled, "Get the fuck out or I will fucking kill you." He ran toward the door and out. The cops took another 10 minutes to show up, while other cops caught the guy. The 25-year-old guy skipped his meds and ran out of his parents' house, believing he was being hunted. It was hard to sleep for a few nights. When I was younger, probably 14 years old, I was playing hide and seek with my little brother, about 4 years old. I was hiding and he was taking quite a while to find me. I was hiding in his room, which was right next to mine. He suddenly comes running into his room, where I'm hiding, and goes straight to where I was. I asked him, "How'd you know where I was?" He says, "The man in your mirror told me where you were hiding." The apartment above mine caught fire. I thought the fire alarm was just a test until I heard something explode directly above me. I grabbed my cat and bolted down 11 flights of stairs to see flames bursting 10 feet out of the balcony above my unit. I was left home alone to watch the dogs while my parents did a carriage job. I was sitting near a window watching random videos on my phone. Being home alone at night always makes me uneasy, and the fact I was watching the occasional horror game did not help. I looked over at the window and saw 2 glowing eyes staring in at me. I literally screamed and almost fell out of my seat. It was my cat. She wanted to come inside. My mom had went to go run errands for about 30 minutes, but she couldn't bring me, and I was around 8 at the time. It was afternoon and I decided to take a nap, and barely even 2 minutes into sleeping I feel someone fucking grab my back with long nails. They didn't hurt, but I could still feel that they had long nails. Yes, this more than likely was sleep paralysis, but I could literally feel it. I jumped up and couldn't go back to sleep. I thought it was her messing with me, but I checked and her car wasn't in the driveway and she wasn't in any of the rooms. I told her and she got creeped out. I had trouble sleeping for 2 weeks after that. I live alone and I once swallowed a piece of food that got stuck and I almost choked. I was able to cough hard and blow it out, but it reminded me of the danger of living alone. Years ago I had the sweetest little dog. She never barked. One night, I was home alone, she and I were laying on my bed. She jumps up and goes absolutely wild, barking her head off and jumping at the window above my bed. I freaked out and spent the night on the couch. We lived up on the side of the mountain and had no neighbors within 5 miles. The next day I went to take the trash out and the cans had been absolutely demolished by a bear. Just huge tears in the aluminium. Those cans were just outside my bedroom window. My sweet little miniature Schnauzer was ready to take on a freaking bear. I, at the time 17F, was home alone at my dad's rural farm. Nearest neighbor was 2 miles away and a hard-of-hearing old man, washing dishes in my pajamas, and all of a sudden I notice that a semi has pulled into the road leading up to the house. It's like a T, the road continues before and after the driveway and the driveway only has one access point. The house is surrounded by farmland and sometimes grain trucks come this way, so I didn't think too much about it until I noticed that it has fully parked across the driveway and there is a man knocking on the kitchen window and asking me to come out. He apparently needed help backing up around the corner at the crossroads and wanted me to come out there and help him. I yelled that if he needed help that he could call the sheriff, and when he tried to come into the house, mudroom has a screen door that doesn't lock and he was going for that, I brandished a gun at him, didn't point it, just made him aware it was in my hand, and screamed at him to get the fuck off my land. He did leave, and thank fuck, because that was an unloaded gun and he was a lot bigger than me. Hearing mortars felling in the house roof back in Iraq. Holy shit, that is terrifying, and still I jump while sleeping when there is a lightning strike outside. When the toilet bowl water wouldn't stop rising. When I was a kid, I was home alone during a thunderstorm. It was a pretty nasty lightning storm, tons of thunder, and I was on the couch cuddling our dog because she was terrified of the loud noises and flashing lights. We had 2 Bartlett pear trees in our front yard, and during the storm, one of them got struck by lightning. It felt and sounded like the entire world was exploding, and I'm pretty sure I screamed as it was happening. Our dog was terrified too, and she peed herself a little, which I can't blame her for at all. That was, by far, the most terrifying thing I've experienced while home alone. The wall of sound just disrupted everything. I can't adequately describe it. Went out into the backyard with the dog, discovered there's a man on the roof. I call my mum, she says she knew he was coming as she hired him to check the skylight, but then adds to make sure I'm fully dressed as he's been rumored to like young women, if you catch my drift. Scary because it didn't occur to mum that I was in the age bracket that guy supposedly had a taste for, and she didn't say anything until I found him and called. Dog and I went and hid in the basement after I hung up. I've had multiple scary encounters, but this one really freaked me out. I was 19, living in an unfinished basement in a bad part of town. It was summertime and I had no AC, so in my closet, there was this massive window that I had open, still had a screen on. I worked 3rd shift as a line cook, so I returned back to my place around 3 AM and started making some dinner. As I'm sitting down, browsing my phone and munching, I hear a noise come out from the window. I thought it was my TV for a second, so I don't think anything of it. Until I heard scratching, then a loud groan. A man's voice followed it saying "fucking help me, man," and I immediately panicked. He was yelling at me, calling me all sorts of names. It was actually terrifying. I ran to my window, locked it, then sprinted upstairs to wake up my landlord. Since we were both ladies with very little defense skills, we stayed inside, watching from the window while police/ambulance arrives. Apparently it was some doped up guy who walked a block with his bone sticking out of his thigh. I kept my window closed after that and dealt with the humidity for my remaining time there. Had sleep paralysis for the first time home alone when I was like 15. Scary AF. I was homesick and I thought I heard a little girl call my name, then I couldn't move and my jaw was opening but I couldn't shut it. Then boom, I'm moving again. Couldn't understand what had just happened and I thought ghosts could be real until I learned what sleep paralysis was. Had it twice now. I was at the tail end of the latchkey generation, so I was often home alone as young as 6 or 7, even as an only child. One day while I was sitting at the breakfast bar counter during the summer break, I heard talking inside the house. Specifically, down in the basement. The basement stairs were right off the kitchen, and we often left the old wooden door open to let the cool air come up from the basement during the summer. This house was very old, and just had weird architecture. I didn't like the basement. So when I heard talking, I turned off the tiny TV on the kitchen counter because I thought it was coming from that, but it wasn't. It was two men talking, in a low, albeit normal tone. I walk up to the doorway to the basement, and so quietly, I lean in, pressing my ear down towards the darkness. The voices are more clear, and I heard the distinct sound of shuffling and footsteps on the very unfinished basement floor. I grabbed the extra long cord kitchen phone and run out the side door, also off the kitchen, curling around the corner of my house and calling the police. I keep the side door in my sights as a cop car arrived about 10 minutes later. They checked the basement, the whole house. Nothing. No one. That was just my first experience in that house. A half-eaten panettone that I didn't buy. I live alone. On July 27, 1980, I was at home in our house in northern Kentucky. I was a young kid and had just been allowed to stay at home alone. I was sitting on the floor when suddenly the entire house shook. I was on a dead-ass sprint out the door, panicking. I had no clue what happened. Mount St. Helens had blown up a few months earlier, so I thought another volcano had erupted, this time closer to my house. My parents came home. I told them what happened. They told me it was my imagination. They were right, it was not Mount St. Helens erupting again. It was the first time I ever experienced an earthquake. To this day, my parents think it was my imagination. It was not. https://pubs. geoscienceworld.org//article abstract/72/1/221/118264/ The Sharpsburg, Kentucky earthquake 27 July 1980 ? Redirected from full text. I was 15 years old, home alone, when I very clearly heard the sound of a child laughing and running on a hard-surfaced floor through the house. One-story house, all floors, even the kitchen area, were carpeted. Hearing dripping noises as I'm about to leave to go stay over at a friend's. Go downstairs to find the relief valve on my hot water heater had given up and was trying to flood my basement. I was 11 years old and home alone reading one night while my parents were at a funeral home wake. When the grandfather clock struck 8 o'clock, his dong fell and crashed to the bottom of the case, banging the swinging pendulum against the glass as it went. At first, I didn't know what all the commotion was, thinking that probably someone was breaking in. It was after work, late at night. I'm chilling on the couch playing video games. My cat is on the couch next to me. All of a sudden, I see movement in the corner of my eye. Turn my head. Nothing. Normally, not that big of a deal, except my cat's gotten up from her reclined position and is also looking in that direction. There's a time when I was younger that I don't remember so well, but it involved me locking the door to the basement and the phone lines not working and my mom rushing home. Wish I remembered that one. This probably wasn't where you were going with this, but I went through a hurricane without evacuating because, well, I had done so multiple times in the past. But this time, when the backside of the eye wall hit my condo, up on the top floor corner, it busted my windows and blew my front door open, sending a flood of water inside that was gushing down the walkway. I couldn't get to the stairs at that point, and the power was out, so I couldn't use any elevators. For the next 45 minutes I thought that the roof and walls would collapse and they'd find my body in the rubble the next day. But they didn't, and I'm still alive 25 years later. When I was a teenager, my house was broken into while I was asleep on the couch, twice. Once by a trashy neighborhood kid looking for cash and or my dad's pot. Second time was by a creepy dude I met briefly the day before who kept making pervy comments to me. When he first came in I thought it was my dad using the back door. But then I listened to him walk around the house and realized it wasn't my dad. I then looked up and seen him standing with his back to me in my dining room. I laid back down and pretended to be asleep and just prayed he would leave without noticing me. He noticed me and stood over me and watched me sleep for what felt like forever. But luckily a car came down the road and I guess it spooked him and he ran out the back door. As soon as he left I ran to lock the door and get my dad's gun. I didn't know what to do, so I waited for my dad and brother to come home to tell them what happened. My brother went to the house this guy was staying at to sort it out. He was going to fuck him up. But the people he was staying with said he left in a hurry and wouldn't let my brother inside to verify. We never saw that guy again. In case anyone is wondering why we didn't just call the cops, it would have been his word against mine and we don't trust cops in my family. My last name isn't well received by police in my hometown. When I was home alone as teenager, I heard a terrifying noise that sounded like a possessed woman screaming in agony or rage. I silently poked my head out my bedroom door only to hear it again as it echoed throughout the house. I ducked back in, grabbed a knife from my bedside table, and hid in the corner. Our closest neighbors were over an acre away and fairly quiet, and this sounded like it was right outside the house, so it wasn't them. I wondered if it was even human, and if it wasn't human, what was it? My family wouldn't be home for hours, and if I wanted to call for help, I would have to leave my bedroom to get to the landline. I decided not to risk it and stayed put. For the next half an hour, I heard it off and on. I tried to read a book, but couldn't focus enough. Finally, I became almost bored of feeling mortal terror. Holding my knife, I ventured out to find the source of that unholy sound, because I am apparently that idiot who dies in a horror movie. I crept through the house and realized that the shriek sounded like it was coming from inside the house. I almost turned back at that moment, then I saw my cat and realized that if I didn't stop the monster, she could die. I was headed towards the kitchen when I heard the noise behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I spun around, only to find my cat looking out the window. Then I watched as she opened up her mouth and yelled at a cat outside. How can a freaking 12-pound cat scream like a freaking cougar? I didn't even know she could make that noise. It didn't even sound like a cat. This is the demon in question. She's now 18 years old and while she is less angry, she's still far angrier than the average cat. She's on permanent house arrest after she's attacked small dogs, giant dogs, other cats, mice, snakes, and possibly a horse, according to the vet. She has wanted to hunt human babies, but in her defense, babies crying basically tells nearby predators that they are helpless and tender. She also likes cuddling with me. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I lived alone in a little house on the gated school grounds where I worked. It should be noted that for the front half of my house, the walls were just chain link fencing attached to support pillars, the floor and ceiling. My bedroom had solid walls and a door that locked, but it was so hot, I never closed it. One night it was raining super hard, and I was just watching TV on my laptop like normal. I kept just barely hearing this weird pinging sound. I'd pause my show and listen, but not hear anything else. My house was also full of rats and bugs, so I was used to constant little noises. A few times I felt the pings as much as I'd heard them. Like the wall was vibrating slightly. Again, I'd pause my show, listen. Nothing suspicious. After a while, I got ready for bed, put my laptop away, tucked my mosquito net under my mattress, so I was in like a net-tight little tent, and switched to watching TV on my phone until I fell asleep. I woke up to what sounded like someone whispering my name. I sat half up. I could see the crouched shape of a person next to my bed. I reached out and touched someone's hand, inside my net tent. I think I may have whispered a pretty shocked sounding "what?" and the person jumped up and ran out of the room. It happened so fast I honestly thought maybe I dreamed it. I got up and went to see if I'd left my front door unlocked. I thought maybe a member of my host family saw it swinging open and came in to check on me. Nope. Door locked. I thought maybe one of the chain link panels had come loose, so I started walking around my front room/porch pushing on everyone to see if it was secure. When I came to the very last panel, I saw a gaping hole. Someone had cut through it and bent the wires back so it would stay open. The pings I'd heard were wire cutters. Whoever it was, he must have been hiding in my house for hours, watching and waiting for me to fall asleep. He didn't steal anything or hurt me at all, but the moment I saw that hole in my wall is the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Someone broke into my house when I was 13. I was upstairs playing video games when someone kicked in my front door. I ran to look and saw two men entering. They didn't see me, so I slowly and as quietly as possible went back to my room. I turned off the TV and I hid under my bed while they tore my house apart. One of them came in my room and actually stole the Sega Genesis I was just playing. I was pretty sure I was going to be found at this point as I was breathing heavy out of fear. The same person then went to my brother's room and killed his bird by smashing the cage because it wouldn't shut up. They stayed in the house for a while, smashing stuff looking for God knows what. Even had a beer from the fridge sitting on our couch. Eventually they left, but I stayed under the bed till my dad came home. I just bought a house a few months ago and found animal poop in front of my bedroom door. I don't own any animals. I couldn't find any way a small animal could come in or out. I learned that cockroaches in the south can fly. I had just moved into my own apartment in Memphis, and one of the first nights I was there, I see a damn roach crawling up my door. I tried to smash it with something and it flew off the door and hit me in the face. I screamed like a bitch. Fuck that shit. I almost choked to death while home alone when I was a kid. I shared this story before, but when I was like 11 years old I was home alone one day during the summer, just watching TV while eating Skittles. I liked to put a bunch in my mouth and make like a Skittle ball that I would chew on. Something on the show I was watching made me laugh and I swallowed the ball, which got lodged in my throat. I then experienced a few seconds of sheer terror because I realized that there was nobody here to help me at all and I was probably gonna die. Thankfully, I remembered some cartoon or movie where someone jammed their stomach on a chair and got something unstuck from their throat. So, I lunged at the corner of the recliner as hard as I could with my stomach and it actually worked and popped the small ball out. It was super lucky because I really had no idea what I was doing, but one of the worst feelings I have ever experienced. Definitely never rate Skittles that way again after that, and to this day I'm still a bit paranoid about eating certain things when alone. I remember one time I was home alone as teenager, 15-16 years old. My mum called me to check how everything was going and all of a sudden the picture frame in the bathroom fell off the wall and twatted the radiator, emitting a loud gong-like sound. I put it back up on the wall and was returning to the phone when another picture frame, this time in the hallway next to the phone, fell to the floor. I was understandably unnerved and explained what happened to my mum. She laughed it off as being a spooky coincidence. After I ended the call with my mum, I went to the kitchen to make dinner. Kitchen faced the driveway. Partway through making dinner, the lights on my mum's car turned on and the boot opened. The keys were in a drawer in its own wee box, so I don't understand how this happened. Cat jumped on the car maybe? Safe to say I slept with the lights on that night. A friend of mine had a guy run through her backyard trying to evade police or something when she was home alone. There was even a police helicopter flying over at the time searching for the guy. Apparently there were guns involved or a shootout or something before he ended up running through the yard. Can't remember exact details since it was a long time ago. She was probably about 15 at the time. She was just chilling on her bed and then suddenly saw the shadow of a man passing by her window. And then the next second had police just about forcing their way into her house to look for the man even though he was long gone by then. I have something to share. I was in 4th or 5th grade, on the computer playing Club Penguin, yes, the good old days, and it was getting dark without me realizing. The house was dead silent, my older sister and brother were upstairs taking a nap, and my dad was not home yet. Mom is out of the picture. To clarify, our house was pretty small at that time and the kitchen was to my left within a few feet. Anyways, as I was super focused on the screen, a loud shattering sound came from the kitchen. When I looked over, the glass bowl and spoon my sister had placed on the kitchen counter earlier just completely shattered into pieces everywhere. Initially I thought someone freaking shot the bulb because the sound was super loud, and I remember freezing up, unable to move for a bit because I didn't know what the heck happened. This made me scared to be alone for a while. When I was 14, my parents left me alone to go to dinner with my uncle and his new girlfriend, and like 2 hours in all, 3 of my dogs that were laying beside me jumped up and, staring at the window out to the front yard, started growling. So like any sensible redneck, I grabbed a shotgun from my dad's gun cabinet, put my dogs on leashes and walked outside the back door. I rounded the corner to the front yard, my dogs almost ripping the leashes from my hand, snarling to a man in a clown costume with his hands up, screaming, "I'm sorry, it was just a prank bro, don't kill me." I was a little kid home alone in bed with a cold while the rest of the family went to early church services. Then I heard the sound of a lot of airplanes flying overhead, followed by numerous explosive sounds. Then I heard people in the neighborhood outdoors screaming and crying and adults yelling for their kids. I looked out the window and saw people in our neighborhood running about and a whole lot of car engines starting up and leaving the area. I was confused and scared as I had no idea what was happening. Then my next door neighbor came into the house and asked me where everyone was, and I told them they all left except I was home alone. So he wrapped me in a blanket, picked me up and took me to his car, which was filled with his family and some belongings. I was driven to the mountainous areas of Honolulu, and along the way I saw people scurrying around in panic, women and kids crying, and I was just totally scared and confused. It was December 7, 1941, and Japanese planes were bombing Pearl Harbor and other of the many military installations in Honolulu. Later, I was reunited with my family, who profusely thanked our neighbor for looking after me, and everyone sat down to talk about what happened that day, which was the start of World War II for Hawaii and the US. Edit: our lives were completely altered in the following days. A total blackout of the city was put in place, which meant that no lights of any kind were allowed to be shown after dark. No cars were allowed to drive at night, all businesses were closed after dark, no one was allowed outdoors after dark. There were neighborhood wardens who checked up on all homes to assure they followed the total darkness edict, and violators were arrested and fined. We coped by painting all our windows black besides having them draped over. This allowed us to read books or play board games under candlelight while we fashioned blankets to totally cover us so as to not allow leakage of light. Fun times. I remember when the war was near its end and the street lamps in Honolulu were turned on again. People rushed to the streets to glory in seeing Honolulu at night again. Was going to the bathroom, everything's normal, I'm just on my phone, then I look over to the door and there's a spider. It's not big, but it's not small, just a normal spider. But I have arachnophobia. And my parents aren't coming home for at least half an hour. Didn't move that entire time, I just sat there staring at it and crying. Luckily I didn't die. I heard my floor creak in the middle of the night, and when I turned my head I saw a shadowy figure in the center of my room. It was dark and I was not wearing my glasses, but I get spooked easily, so I couldn't reason myself into not being terrified. And then my cat started to growl and hiss toward the exact shadow I was looking at. I have never been more scared in my entire life. Edit: autocorrect on one word. Edit: to answer comments. I scrambled for my bedside lamp and there was nothing. My cat took a while to calm herself down. I left the light on and I waited for the sun to come up to fall asleep. As to what it was, I have no idea. My bedroom floor had never creaked before and it has never creaked since. But houses make noises, so it's not that weird, I guess. I wasn't wearing my glasses, so even though I could have sworn the shadow was standing in the middle of the room, it was probably cast on the wall behind. However, my room faces the garden and is 2 floors up, and there is absolutely nothing that casts any shadows there. So I have no idea what it could have been. I wasn't brave enough to leave my bed and look outside. The cat thing is probably the easiest to explain. I was so freaked out that I must have passed on my fear to her. She's not the bravest, poor thing, so props to her for staying with me and not hiding somewhere. I had a terrible experience home alone, that actually likely caused panic in other people as well. When I first moved into my own apartment, I had a PTSD-triggered dream. I act out my dreams sometimes. I was probably a bit tangled in my bed sheets, but in my dream a spectre of death was clawing at me. As I tried to get away, I tripped, and felt the hand of death at my feet, trying to drag me to hell. I opened my apartment door and yelled as loud as I could. "He's killing me, oh God, he's killing me. Help. Help." Don't know how long I shouted for, but I came to my senses and went back inside, not entirely convinced that the spectre of death wasn't waiting for me. Sorry if I freaked you out, neighbors. It was more several small things than one big thing. Mainly hearing doors open and close, seeing a shadow outside a window, hearing crunches outside, sense light coming on. The noise I heard outside might have been a possible intruder because we lived right next to this apartment complex that was shady. Other stuff though I can't explain. A strange man, mostly naked, standing at my bedside. He asked if he could get in and cuddle. My parents just sold the house I spent my adolescent years in. We were pretty sure it was haunted. At least 2 people died in the house, one of which was my grandma. We would see weird shadows and hear doors opening and closing sometimes. But the weirdest thing was hearing very faint piano music when no one else was home. No TVs or radios on, and it wasn't coming from outside. My brother and I both experienced it on separate occasions. We didn't have a piano in the house, but the older couple that my parents bought the house from had a baby grand in the formal living room. We never could explain what it was. I lived in a cemetery during my adolescence, and that was creepy for a while on its own, but around the time I was a freshman or junior in high school, I was home alone and it was a normal day. My dad and his girlfriend were out doing something and my brother was staying with one of his friends. It's around 8 p.m. so the cemetery was closing. The hours were 8 a.m. to whenever the sun went down. I was just hanging out watching TV when someone knocks on my door. It was weird because usually if anyone had a question about the grounds they would go to the office door. Office and house were attached. I'm freaked out. I hated being alone in that house for the first couple of years, and this sudden knock at the door coupled with me being there alone really made me uneasy. Regardless, I answer the door and it's just a normal looking guy, and I'm like, "Hey man, what's going on?" We're closed and he just stared at me for a second and real shallow and calmly said, "I think there's a dead body here." I said, "Well, yet is a cemetery," like the smart ass kid I was. And he looks at me and frowns and he says, "No, I'm serious, I called 911 and they're on the way, but I think someone's dead over there," and he points off up the hill. I'm 15 or 16 years old, man, freaking the fuck out, and I'm like, "Oh okay, well let me call my dad and let him know what's going on," and the guy's like, "Okay, I'm going back over there so when the police get here I can let them know where the body is." I don't know why I had this feeling, but next thing I said was, "I'll go with you," so this guy takes off in his truck up the hill and I walk the road up the hill and he's parked there next to this bush, and sure enough, a poor woman who'd lost her husband earlier that month had crawled under this bush not too far from her husband's grave and shot herself in the chest with a revolver. Living in that cemetery I had a lot of encounters and had been in close proximity to deceased individuals, but this really tore me up inside. I had felt some sense of responsibility to go and make sure the grounds of the place were okay because I was a foolish teenager. I've had a lot of time to process it as it was a long while ago, but back then it was the scariest thing that ever happened living there. I was probably 11 and home alone with my 2 younger brothers. It was raining real bad, and I mean real bad. We were all just chilling and watching TV when suddenly the toilet in the hallways started bubbling real loud, and shortly after the rain started leaking in from the back door. That leak devolved into a little waterfall down the back door, but on the inside. Me being 11 and not knowing what to do just rushed to grab all the towels from upstairs and instructed one of my brothers to watch that the toilet didn't spill while me and the other tried to not get the hardwood floors wet by pushing towels against the back door. I had never seen such a bad storm before and I was honestly sure that we'd flood the house before my parents came home. and that they'd blame me. That was probably the scariest part of it all. I was home alone, duh, and I was on my phone. Are you ever on your phone so long you look up and the sun went down? Well, I looked up and everything was dark. Shit, better go water the plants like I meant to 3 hours ago lol. I get up and cautiously try to not whack my leg on the coffee table, because it is pitch black, and that's when I hear shuffling outside. Right outside the door. I resist the urge to freeze and walk right up to the door to make sure it's locked, and as soon as I put my hand out for the knob, it meets my hand because whoever was out there opened the door. I resist the door and they start pushing harder. I make the calculation that if that didn't scare them, then they must be okay with hurting me, and I lose my mind. What the fuck? Whoever is out there had better hope they don't get this door open, because I will kill every last one of you talking out of my ass in an adrenaline-induced attempt to scare them away, or at least alert the neighbors. They stopped and ran away so quick I couldn't get a look. They probably thought, geez, that little girl's parents don't even let her use the lights when they're not home. Let's get out of here. So I called the police and filed a report, saw a car with the spotlight on looking around a bit later, but nothing ever came of it. Except I wasn't murdered, so that's cool. Last year I moved to a new city for school, and my girlfriend drove down with me to help me move in. When it was time for her to leave to head home, I remember the moment I heard the door click shut after she left that I started to experience a panic attack and felt like I couldn't breathe. This has never happened before, but I had an overwhelming sense of doom, and couldn't shake the feeling that if something did happen to me, I was all alone in this city. Worse, I was all alone in my apartment, and if I died, nobody would even discover my body for weeks. Maybe not the scariest, but I hate it when cats do this. Just happened last week. I was home alone, which normally my BF and I are both home. BC work from home, but he had to go into work that day, with our 3 cats. Something I have done with my kitten since we first got him is to hand feed little pieces of kibble to him. Well, I was in our spare room where the kibble was and giving each of the cats a kitten kibble treat when the youngest, 8 months, suddenly looks out into the hallway, obviously gets scared and just puffs up completely. I couldn't see anything and the other 2 cats didn't react. Then I got his attention back on the kibble finally and he was totally fine. No idea what happened to spook him lol. I have 2. Wife and I had just moved into our new house. My wife had returned to work, my mother-in-law was watching our infant son, and I still had a few days off to get us settled in and paint and such. I hadn't hung curtains yet, and in our living room is a massive 9x7-foot window. I was taping up for painting and this big-ass truck tears into my driveway and a man and a woman get out quickly and come to the door. They start pounding on the door and peeking through the giant window. I actually had my handgun safe on the table. I had planned to mount it that day. I grabbed my handgun and went to the door. I have a storm door and it was locked. I opened the inner wooden door and they both looked a bit taken aback. I had the gun behind my back. They asked for a Rodrigo. I politely said that there is no one here by that name and I would appreciate if they left. They sort of looked at each other, shrugged and got back in the truck. Been 8 years and I've never seen them. This one is a bit more surreal. My wife had left for work early and had dropped our kiddo off at her mom's for the day. I was getting ready for work myself, and had just gotten out of the shower. I lay down on the bed to just sort of stretch out and enjoy the silence. If you have kids, you know what I mean. I was enjoying the brief reprieve, when my son's little walker thing started to go off. It was one of those contraptions for babies that has wheels and lets them scoot around the room. This particular one had several buttons that played noises and lights. Well, it played a few different musical chimes from different buttons and the lights were going off. I got the chills and decided to get dressed and head to work early. It was the first sort of creepy thing we have experienced at our house. Today, we have a storm brewing outside with major wind and drizzle. I was sitting prepping for a Zoom meeting and had opened my window for some fresh air. The wind picked up and my curtain was slapping me in my face, so I hooked them on the window. Just before my call starts, the rain comes down heavy, so I close my window forgetting I had my curtain hooked in. The next gust of wind moved my closed window that had no space against the balled up curtain, and it cracked the bladey window. My reaction: I thought someone shot at me, which really isn't something that would actually happen, and instead of hitting the deck I suddenly went into a defensive ninja pose. All I learned from the situation is that if it was I gunshot I'd be dead, cause I ain't no airbending, bullet reflecting ninja. It was late at night, home alone, and I was playing some Minecraft with my headset on, straight up vibing, you know. Anyways, as I'm playing, my dog suddenly runs into the room, and I'm just like, how cool, my dog just got let in from outside, my sister must have gotten home. I yelled hello, but I didn't get the usual greeting one of my family members would have given. I got no response at all, absolute silence. I just sat there, frozen for a second, waiting to hear any sounds, nothing. I slowly and quietly grabbed the nearest weapon-like object, a wooden walking stick in the room, and crept towards the kitchen, where the front door is located. As I approached the room I quickly peeked around the doorway and was surprised when I saw absolutely nobody inside the kitchen. To my disbelief, the front door was even shut and locked. At this point I thought I was tripping, so I did a whole tour of every inch of the house, found nothing abnormal or suspicious. It wasn't until my mom got back from the grocery store that she told me she never let the dog out and he had been inside the entire time. Apparently when I was gaming my dog was sleeping in the living room, and when I started making loud Home Alone noises he woke up and ran in to investigate. I felt dumb to say the least. I was fully prepared to beat someone to pulp with a wooden stick. SMH. Edit, full story. First semester at college. Was living at home still, but parents are out of town for a few weeks. Home is out in the country a bit. Closest houses are a good 100 yards away. About 11 p.m. I was in my room playing on the computer. Heard glass breaking in the kitchen. Looked up and both the cat and the dog were in my room, ears perked up, staring at the door to my room. Holy shit. Have you ever read the expression "my heart was in my throat"? My blood ran cold, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. First thing I did was call 911 and tell them I was home alone and I thought somebody was breaking into my house. I happened to have a phone in my room. Second thing I did was grab a pistol, load it, chamber it, and crept to the door of my room. Now, here is the challenge: the hallway, kitchen, front entry, and living room make a square. My room is on one corner. So if somebody is in the kitchen, where the glass broke, if they go around the same direction I go, we are going in circles like in a Pink Panther movie. So I can see into the living room, but it is dark, only light is shining from my bedroom behind, and from the back porch light shining through the archway to the kitchen. We always keep the back porch light on to attract bugs for the porch toad. I see no movement in the shadows, so I go straight out the bedroom door and down the hall, counterclockwise towards the kitchen. I can see into the family room at the end of the hall, but again the only light is the back porch light, and the room is huge and I can't see all of it. First door on the right, bathroom, nothing. Second door on the right, spare bedroom, nothing. I'm turning on the lights as I go, so I can see. At this point, despite sneaking, there is no way somebody would be in the other rooms and not know I am there turning on lights. So now I have the kitchen doorway on the left, and the opening into the family room in front. If I look into the kitchen all the way, I have to turn my back to the family room. If I go far enough to look into the whole family room, I have to turn my back to the kitchen doorway. I decided to do the best I could, and kept my back to the right wall, slowly moved to where I can start seeing into the kitchen, while simultaneously keeping the family room in my peripheral vision. As I start to look into the kitchen, and can see the back door into the kitchen, and the kitchen window are all closed, and unbroken. Then I see it. The glass globe for the ceiling light had fallen to the floor and broken. Motherfucker. I had just changed the light bulb the day before. The little screws that hold it in place are fiddly as fuck. I went through the rest of the house and turned on all the lights. Checked to make sure all the doors and windows are still locked. Then I called 911 back, and tell them what happened and that I am fine. They ask if I still want somebody to come out there. I tell them no. About 30 seconds after hanging up with them, there's loud knocking on the front door and I hear a sheriff's department deputy announcing himself. I unload the pistol and put it in a drawer, yell to him that I am coming, and open up. Told the officer the same thing I told the 911 operator. I assume I still looked scared as shit because he didn't laugh or make a joke or anything. He asked if I wanted him to check the house, which I declined, but he did check around the outside. From the time I called 911 to the officer showing up was somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Not very long, but a really fucking long time when you are creeping through your house with a pistol, thinking there is an intruder. When I was 15, my parents went away for a weekend. I had gone so sleep but was woken up by a strange noise of voices. Came downstairs to the TV on static with volume at maximum, a radio on a late night talk show, manual oven on, and fridge open. All doors and windows were locked, yet I still can't explain it. Didn't sleep a wink all night. I once did a massive bowl out of my bong in the garage, and stepped outside to see 2 Jehovah's Witnesses standing between me and the door to my house. I was watching my baby sister when I heard the front door close. I went up to her standing in the doorway and she went, shh, with her finger against her lips. I legit thought someone broke in. Luckily nobody did and I was fine. My boyfriend and I live in a teeny tiny house next to a massive mansion on some old farmland that has been subdivided into several lots. Essentially we live in the old caretaker's home. The farmland is high on a cliff overlooking a river. The mansion sits right up against the cliff face, and our house is maybe a quarter-mile inland from that. One day over the summer while my boyfriend was away for work, I decided to go outside and do some gardening. A couple of hours later I hear someone scream, "Help me," coming from the direction of the mansion. I paused for a second to see if my ears were deceiving me, and hear another scream, "Someone please help me." Absolutely blood-curdling. My phone was in my overall pockets with me, so I just started sprinting towards the voice. It was a woman's voice, so I assumed it was the wife. I start calling out her name and saying, "I'm coming. Where are you? Where are you?" But she doesn't respond and just keeps screaming for help. First I pictured that she'd fallen off the cliff and horribly broken her legs or back, but then I thought maybe one of the children drowned in the pool, or her husband had a heart attack. My mind was racing with grim possibilities. I was mentally preparing myself to see something very gruesome and administer some serious first aid. I run up the driveway, sprint to the side yard where the pool is, and find the wife standing on one of the pool chairs. She looks totally shocked to see me. Completely out of breath, I ask her, "Are you okay?" She says, "No. There was a massive snake. Do you see it?" I just burst out laughing. I don't like snakes either, but goddamn, those pleas for help were a wee bit dramatic, no? I told her the snake was gone and just walked home after that. Such a scary moment for a whole lot of nothing. I heard this weird sound like someone breathing heavy when I went in the backyard for a smoke. It didn't stop. The next day they found my neighbor dead on the ground. Turned out he had a heart attack. Always investigate. I've had some pretty violent lucid dreams, sleep paralysis. I'll give 2 scary and 1 surreal. I went to sleep in what seemed like only a few minutes, when an extremely loud sound kind of like a bang goes off and I sit up, and next to my bed standing is a figure with a light drape over its body. I realize it's sleep paralysis and I force myself awake. There was a time where I was naturally getting into lucid dreaming, not necessarily on purpose, but like I said, natural. And nightly I would do just a little bit more to move myself and control what I'm doing, such as looking around the room or even sitting up. One time I was nearly fully cognizant of everything going on around me, and I sat up and then slid my legs over the side of the bed, and as I put my feet on the ground the floor changed to fire and in the distance everything looked like hell, and While I wanted to go out and explore more and use this new ability, something inside of me knew that if I went out there that I might not come back. This is the non-scary one, but I woke up and I felt like I was completely awake. I sat up, I didn't get out of the bed, but I looked all around me and on the floor there were things that weren't usually there, like a shirt or something, and various things were in different positions around the room. So even though it felt real, I knew in my mind that it wasn't, so I pushed myself to wake up again. Actually, I've become very proficient at waking myself up, it only takes a few moments. One time when I was like 10 years old, I was going on my computer. A few hours later the power turned off, then I heard some creepy box music. When I checked the room where it came from, my older cousin jumped at me. This scared the shit out of me. Meeting a burglar in my hallway as I stepped out of the kitchen. We scared the shit out of each other. He ran and I went the opposite way. Thing was, I ran to a neighbor's where I called the police. They didn't show for an hour. If the burglar had stayed, he could have emptied the house no problem. As it was, police lifted prints and picked him up the next day. He had more form than a race day ticket and got sent back to jail. Last April I was home with my 2 dogs when I smelled a funny plastic smell. I got up and inspected but couldn't find any issues, so I went to lay back down on the couch. On my way through living room I put my hand on the wall and it was hot, like really fucking hot. Fast forward a few minutes, each lasting roughly a year, and my whole apartment is filled with smoke and flames are coming out of the ceiling. Long story short, my downstairs neighbors had a fire in their fireplace and the chimney caught fire. We all survived, but it's been a rough few months. We ultimately had to move because of the damage, but I will say we are in a very nice place and the dogs seem to love this neighborhood. I was sitting on the couch in my parents' house alone late one night and kept hearing noises from the garage. I didn't think anything of it because my parents had 3 cats, but felt a little anxious because the noises seemed odd for cats. Got up at some point and saw all 3 cats napping in another room and heard the noises from the garage again. Some background on this more recent one: I don't typically remember dreams, I don't visualize text in my head, and one of my then roommates had been whispering something outside my door earlier that night, not like half a conversation, like hoarsely drawn out name. I was lying in bed with my door closed trying to sleep and felt a weight settle next to me on the bed. Around the weight of a mid-sized dog or someone sitting gingerly. I was able to move, so wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis. Still with my eyes closed, a message visually popped up in my head like an error message saying we have reason to believe you are being watched. Do not move. I don't actually remember specifically past the first sentence, but that was the gist. It might have been please stay completely still until. And I forget the rest. A loud knock on the window and then some scurrying after I yelled who's there. Still not sure if it was a burglar or just a car or something. It was dark outside and had my curtains closed so couldn't see. I'm a type 1 diabetic and I've had a few really bad low blood sugars when I've been home alone. At one point, I considered going outside to the end of our driveway. I figured if I passed out, someone would see me and call 911. Thankfully it didn't get to that point. I was a teenager. I have to walk past my bookshelf to get to my bed. As I was walking past it, a book flew off the shelf and landed about 5 feet away, narrowly missing hitting my head. The book that was on the floor was previously wedged tightly between other books and that whole shelf was full, leaving no possible way it could have just fell. I left my room and the book where it lay and went to the living room until my parents came home. I was about 10 and it was a typical summer thunderstorm in Wisconsin. All of a sudden there was a bright flash and a huge boom, like a bomb went off. The power flickered and somehow I had went from lying on the floor to the top of the couch. What had actually happened? Lightning had struck the maple tree in our front yard, splitting the trunk completely in half. The boom was the trunk splitting. It also knocked the color out of our TV. Still don't know how I got from the floor to the top of the couch. When I lived with my mom in one specific apartment, a lot. That stuff could never been explained. Home alone at my own place, hearing noises and never finding any cause. Like I once heard something fall down in the next room, never found out what it was. Also when I lived with my mom and was home alone, my hula hoop suddenly moved and then stopped. Also I heard stuff falling in a certain wardrobe and never found a cause. My mom still has them and experienced the same falling sound. We suspect a weird sound connection to the neighbors next door too that end up sounding like it comes from the wardrobe. As a teen, a mirror. As a grown-up, 2 armed robbers. Would not recommend. The mirror was kinda to my insecurities. Technically it was in the hallway, but living in apartments my whole life has led me to consider the building my home. Especially this one because the building had very few units and it seems like I was the only one home.